This is episode 198 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico podcast. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Wally, everyone else is doing coronavirus updates, so we might as well just make it a thing here on the podcast, huh?
Yes, it's obligatory. I believe the FCC will not let us use the internet if we don't do a coronavirus and COVID-19 update each week.
Yes. We had a big week in terms of the governor holding multiple press conferences. I believe it was Wednesday and Friday or Monday and Wednesday. I don't remember, but she held two of them. And, starting again to further open up our state. Churches were opened up to 10%. Actually, I think it was Monday and Wednesday now that it comes to me. But then she went ahead and did 25%. Basically, 10% was you can have a baptism or some kind of very small religious observance. 25% is still pretty minimal, and I know that the Catholic Church I go to is going to be working through exactly how they are going to handle that. Of course, elderly and people susceptible to the illness are still encouraged or required not to go out. Retail is starting to open as well, and Elephant Butte Lake is still closed. And of course, the big controversial requirement is that masks are now a requirement as we wear them in public. Although
there are exceptions.
Well, yeah, there's exercise, there's eating and drinking, and there's also the fact that APD, the mayor, has said that APD will not be issuing citations for people not obeying the mask requirement. So it'll really be up to the state police if they choose to do that kind of thing.
Yeah, the state police, few and far between, not a big presence in the urban areas, although we have seen in the past year and a half, they come here to kind of do what the Albuquerque Police Department can't or won't. From a crime point of view, I sort of suspect they won't be coming here to be the masked police, but we'll have to see. It's not an impossibility.
Yeah, it'll be one of those things that's interesting moving forward. And what I think is most interesting / concerning is that this does seem to be, a lot of overused phrases have come out of this whole virus situation. I never want to hear social distance or quarantine again, but I'm looking at a document that was put out by It's All Together Now, New Mexico, or All Together New Mexico. And it's a very detailed, dated May 15th, 2020, PDF document, 47 pages in length, detailing COVID-safe practices for individuals and employers. I gather from the amount of effort they put into this kind of thing that this is where they are moving towards in terms of the new normal, with masks being worn in public, heavy emphasis on social distancing in various, public outlets, stores, etc., houses of worship. I do think we will see more opening gyms, for example, athletic gyms, workout facilities, those kinds of things. But I think there's going to be a lot of what we see now moving forward into the at least fall. This All Together New Mexico document is not the kind of thing you whip up for a 2-week process of moving towards greater opening. This is the kind of thing that you have kind of on hand as a long-term document that you use as a guidebook moving forward.
Yeah, and to be perfectly clear, I mean, this is a state document. There's a letter from the governor on, I believe it's not page 1, which is the in the PDF. That's the cover. But basically, right at the front on page 3, there's a letter from the governor. So yes,
This is an official
yeah,
document.
this is it. This is, and who knows what standing it has legally, and that's not what we're here to talk about. But yes, this is something that looks like it's a long-term, or at least for the next phase of this. This is what we are going to be doing as a state here in New Mexico.
And I'll go out on a limb and say that next phase, we're talking to the fall. We're not talking about...
through the rest of the year, if
through the
not
rest of the
further.
year, yeah.
Yes, I agree with you on that.
Furthermore, and I'm sure it's no coinkydink, as they say, Mayor Keller has his own new plan for the city of Albuquerque, dated May 14th. So I suspect that the city and the state have been coordinating some of these things and sharing lots of notes back and forth in terms of how they both plan to reopen. It's not that Grisham and Keller are political enemies by any stretch. They tend to see eye to eye on a vast majority of issues, and the fact that these two documents came out within 24 hours of each other leads me to believe that there's a lot of overlap, sharing of notes, et cetera, between the city of Albuquerque and the governor. So, I've read through these documents. It's worth taking a look at both of them. But the gist of it is that a lot of what we are seeing and doing now in terms of being out in the streets, the social distancing levels, is going to be reflected down the road, and I'm talking several months, with some additional activities being brought online as time passes. So it's definitely, new normal is a term that I would use to describe it, although a lot of folks, I think, would say it's new abnormal or new troubling. Whether your view on masks is that we should wear them or not, it's there's definitely going to be those kinds of discussions and points moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there's a lot of businesses that have some opportunity. There's still some out there that do not. Hairdressers is one that comes to mind, gyms, restaurants that don't have drive-throughs or not doing the takeout. There's some still pretty substantial businesses in terms of industries that have a lot of people that have frequented them before, and that have a lot of employees that are still waiting to come back online. And you alluded to the governor and the mayor. Their documents are similar. Yeah, that's fine. That's not unexpected. But the other thing that's interesting is that the state has a lot more diverse sources of revenue than the city of Albuquerque does. And so, when you look at things, I've started to hear some very friendly to reopening, more friendly language actually coming out of the city of Albuquerque than coming out of the state of New Mexico, at least with the governor in charge doing her briefings a few times a week.
Yeah, well, on that note, the city definitely has a lot more community engagement kinds of things that they do, activities. Obviously, Summerfest, I expect that's canceled, but there's also summer camps, including summer camps at places like the zoo, the biopark.
Yeah.
You've got community centers and other facilities that are going to be either opened or not opened. You have a lot more things that the city tends to directly involve itself with that the state really has, the parks, and they've already opened a lot of those. I know Elephant Butte is a sticking point for a lot of folks. If the governor wants to win any plaudits from folks, she will have that facility at Elephant Butte opened in time for Memorial Day. We've got a week to go. She could do an executive order or something on Thursday or Friday and say, hey guys, we're going to go ahead and open Elephant Butte. Of course, it could set off pandemonium, as we saw when the Wisconsin judge threw out the governor's orders up there, and suddenly you had crowded bars in around Wisconsin. So you never know. You would hope that the governor, if she were to do that kind of thing, would give folks enough time to react and be organized. Or maybe there's something going on behind the scenes because, it is state employees that she's dealing with. So we shall see.
Yeah, and then the other thing that is going to be the 800-pound gorilla is going to be returned to public schools.
Yep.
When will that happen? Are we going to go months and months and months? Obviously, we're coming into the quote-unquote traditional summer vacation time, so it's not necessarily as noteworthy. But, as August and then September, and, now with the modern school calendar, school doesn't come back after Labor Day. It's well before. It's in the middle to end part of August that almost every school opens up. As we sit here in the middle of May, that's not that far away. So that's something that I've heard very little discussion about. That's going to be another very large, when will it open and under what rules and set of circumstances will that happen?
And of course, there's sports, whether you're talking about high school football, which is a major sport for a lot of kids, in extracurriculars for students at the schools. And of course, the Isotopes would love to get started. Of course, minor league baseball, you really can't work the no fan thing.
No, it's not a TV-oriented thing where you make your money by selling TV commercials and radio commercials. There need to be people there watching the games.
Yeah, that's what minor league baseball is all about. I'm not a big golf watching guy. I play golf, but there was a golf tournament, if you will, over the weekend where 4 golfers all played against each other, and it's really one of the few. There's been UFC and some other athletic events that have happened, but a golf tournament is something that I can more identify with. And these big name pro golfers were all out carrying their own bags. So that was kind of a neat little thing. There's been occasional things that have happened during this whole situation that give you a little warm and fuzzy in there. And watching Rory McIlroy carry his own golf bag around the golf course was kind of neat as well. And to take it back to Albuquerque, Rio Grande Foundation picked a great time to get office space on March the 1st. Right, after the session was done, we knew we needed office space, or thought we'd needed office space, but we have space in the Sims building. We're going to keep that space in the Sims building. But I've been going in there once or twice a week to do some work. And something I quickly realized is that the city of Albuquerque parking enforcement folks had not been on the beat for a while. And today, so I'd been parking instead of the garage, parking right outside the building.
Yeah, right on the street.
Yeah. Today I got a warning of citation. So it was the first time the parking guys are at least back, and just every car that was parked on the street had a warning. So warning accepted. I'll be parking back in the garage. And of course, going into the Sims building, that's where Representative Deb Holland, I believe Heinrich, and maybe both he and Udall have office space in there. It's a dead zone. There are very few people working. There's a couple, but that'll be the kind of stuff that we hit those hurdles to eventually when people are going into their office spaces. Or there's some businesses out there that could be just foregoing office space. I don't think congressional offices will be among them. Those people need and want office space. But anyway, it's kind of as we're slowly taking baby steps towards normal, that's where things lie. Kind of an update on the coronavirus as well. Most folks know that the Rio Grande Foundation has pushed back and tried to stop plastic bag bans wherever possible. The mayor of Albuquerque's ban or withholding of enforcement of the ban that had been passed a while back, that was set to expire with the governor's order on May the 15th. The mayor has given us another month in terms of using traditional plastic bags from the grocery store. I'm not surprised by that, considering all of the dangers we are being told on a daily basis that we're exposed to. But of course, remember, the mayor did not repeal the ban or put the ban on hold. because of anything relating to the virus itself. It was in solidarity with grocery workers, and we got to make sure that we don't forget that point.
Yes, yeah, nice talking point, but we will see. It's one of those things that a lot of weaknesses in policy have been exposed here recently with COVID-19, and that's certainly one of them.
You got it. Yes. Yeah. Not too much needs to be said on that issue. A lot of. I'll tell you what. Folks give the Albuquerque Journal a hard time. I mean, they're a media outlet here, and of course, like everybody, their advertising has been decimated by the economy being shut down. Of course, John Trevor is a treasure in terms of what he does and writes about in terms of his cartoons for the Albuquerque Journal. This Sunday's paper was, one of the many good ones, both in terms of the editorial board of the Journal and in terms of the cartoonist, Trevor. And Trevor showed the governor in a picture with the Zia symbol there, talking about science and the importance of science in making her decisions. And, science and statistics have a lot, there's an interrelated relationship there. We talked about statistics a couple weeks ago. But of course, economic science, political science, and other balancing components for decision-making using science are not necessarily being included or given the same weight by the governor. And Trevor made that point very, very cogently, I thought.
Yeah, I think he's a political genius. I've always appreciated his work, and just when you feel like something needs to be said, he's able to do it in one panel, and usually, somewhere between 7 and 20 words, he just puts it out there. Very good. And then you alluded to, and I'm sure we'll talk about it more, the editorial board piece that came out on Sunday, I think said a lot of very important things that really did need saying. First and foremost is a lot of times, we're saying, well, we're going to let the science decide. Well, a lot of times, and how that's been used in modern politics, is that just means we don't want to debate it. It's solved. But hey, what is science? But it is a evaluation of a hypothesis. And in the case of anything to do with coronavirus and COVID-19, to say that there's anything approaching quote unquote science that you can rely on, it just seems like it's a very hollow, very shallow way to approach it. And I did appreciate the Journal's editorial.
Yeah. And, science is what science is, but we don't rely on scientists to make every single decision for us. And I'm not talking about smoking or unprotected sex or drinking or those kinds of things, which, they have their own place and pleasures. And I'm not going to make a scientific case, however. But if we only listen to scientists, nobody would ever get into a car and drive from here to there, because that is,
it's dangerous.
For danger.
Lots of people die doing that every day, or have alcoholic drink, or like you say, alluded to, smoke a cigarette, eat foods that aren't, basically granola and broccoli. So,
So, it takes a human individual making various values and judgments for themselves, ultimately, to make actual policy decision. Now, the governor has taken it upon herself to make a whole variety of policy decisions that I'm not necessarily sure she has to. Is it safe or is it not safe? Well, that depends broadly across who you are. Are you an 85-year-old with breathing problems, or are you a 17-year-old who's healthy? Are you in Lincoln County, Ruidoso, or are you in Gallup or on the Navajo Res? Those are kinds of decisions that you ultimately need additional information to make a decision on. But in general, what level of insecurity are you or danger are you willing to encounter in order to go about living your day-to-day life? And that's why We at the Rio Grande Foundation believe in individual choice, not central planning, because the governor and any scientist, no matter how wonderful they are, do not and cannot understand the decisions that you as an individual need to make on a day-to-day basis. They just don't have the information.
Well, and when, phrases are bandied about like, Paul, we're all in this together. But the people who are usually saying we're all in this together are not the people that have had their businesses shut down, that have lost their jobs. They tend to be people that are living off of retirement income, work for federal or state government. There's a whole host of things that goes on even when you look at an issue like that. And that's to your point, is that in a free society, there's a lot of decisions that get made differently by people in different situations.
The one that drives me nuts that the governor used in her latest press conference is the virus is going to decide. The virus will decide. And a virus is not going to decide anything. And I'm not just talking about the fact that a virus doesn't have a brain capable of deciding things, but we are individuals, again, theoretically able to make decisions for ourselves in our day-to-day lives, not necessarily relying on the statistical evidence of whether the virus is moving beyond the peak or at the peak or whatever situation is. It's not going to tell us what the policy is. And there's been some good articles written on this, but you just can't rely on a virus or the statistical evidence from a virus to make decisions for yourself. You have to make that based on a lot of different aspects of your own personal life and your own values. Wally, we talked about the permanent fund. We did a deep dive into the permanent fund several months ago. I don't have the podcast number off the top of my head, but the permanent fund is going to become a flashpoint here in this whole situation. Mo Maestas, Representative Maestas, and Javier Martinez, kind of the usual suspects there, two of the leading Democratic Party advocates for tapping the permanent fund anytime, anyway, whatever we should do, we should tap the permanent fund, had a article in the paper on Sunday as well, talking about that very topic. And they've made the point many, many times over the last decade that that's what we're going to do for early childhood and pre-K and the whole 9 yards. But it just strikes me as that is their go-to. They have no other options.
Yes, and I think there's at least one other option, and it's not talked about much, and I do know that it's alluded to a bit in the podcast that will follow this one, and that is the $1 billion+ of allocated capital for only partially funded projects. That's a huge piece, and I really haven't heard many people talking about that. That is a lot more low-hanging fruit to bring that back in and put that into something that can benefit the state, not potentially years or decades in the future, but right now. The permanent fund, we will see. You know what? There's a lot of steps to get from point A to point B with regard to the permanent fund under the best of circumstances. And then there's the whole thing about, is it constitutional? Do the feds need to weigh in? There's many legal questions. And the fact that there's not a lot of agreement shows that it's likely that whatever's decided, there may be lawsuits, which could further slow down the, quote, tapping of the permanent fund.
Yeah, and they do make a pitch, if you will, for using the permanent fund to essentially preserve the size of government we have right now. Of course, they always are making their pitch for early childhood and pre-K and those kinds of things. So it's a little bit of a broken record effect here. Not surprising, considering that the governor did a few weeks ago, in really her only economic pronouncement about what she's going to do, talked about tapping the permanent fund. It just seems like they have no willingness to actually consider and prioritize the state budget. It is every single thing that the state of New Mexico does is absolutely 100% essential, and we have to maintain every single thing, even though it's vastly, vastly bigger and our budget vastly bigger than what any number of states does, especially our neighboring states. We just have a much larger government, but everything's essential, darn it.
Per capita, and it's also much bigger even than it was not too many years ago, 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago. It was much smaller on a dollars per citizen, or however you want to take a look at it. But you're right. Everything is essential in government. It's only the private sector that seems like it has non-essential either functions or, in a lot of cases now, non-essential money that you have that you might somehow be called upon to put into the till in the form of more taxes.
Yeah, and Wally, primary voting is now in full swing. Early voting, that is. Of course, folks were admonished, encouraged, begged even to do absentee voting, but early voting in person began on Saturday at the usual voting sites. Of course, those change, but they tried to distribute them around town. Wally, how are you planning to cast your ballot in the primary this year?
Well, I thought I would put on my mask and go to the same strip mall I usually go to. It's one of those, under the best of circumstances, a primary election. Those voting sites don't have very many people in them, so I thought I would do that.
Yeah, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just, what can I say? I'm such a countercultural guy. When the culture says comply, I just stick my neck out and say no. And when you're in New Mexico and everybody supports big government, I go the opposite direction. So,
well, and is it even too late to get your absentee?
I think it is at this point.
Yeah.
But,
so that was my plan though. And I've known people in my own household that have requested the ballots and they haven't gotten them. So we'll see what happens with regard to that. But one of the things about the mail is it's not a self-checking sort of thing. You put it in the mail. Okay, fine. Does it arrive at the right place? And so that is an issue as well. And then you'll have the thing about, well, no, we've sent you an absentee ballot. There's just a lot of confusion that can happen. And I would like to vote in primary, so I thought I would go do it in person.
Yeah. So there's a few races that I want to highlight, and we might do this over a few different episodes depending on how involved we get. But, primaries are primaries. They are internal to the political party. June the 2nd is the final date to go vote in person at your neighborhood polling place. There's no other extraneous issues, no other votes happening. I did sit down meetings in terms of Zoom, Liberty on Quarantine, with Republicans in the Senate race, U.S. Senate, Ronchetti, Elisa Martinez. So Mark Ronchetti, Elisa Martinez, and Gavin Clarkson. The candidates themselves have tried to very much differentiate themselves, but they're all, I think it's safe to say, conservative folks with their own strengths and weaknesses. And I'm not going to go into those because I look for policy differences. What are major policy differences? Some folks, Ronchetti's made some remarks about President Trump and whether it was said in jest or whatever. They caught him on camera. Quite frankly, I think all three are very capable. Again, they're all going to face Ben Ray Lujan. They're all solid conservatives in my estimation, in my looking at them individually. In CD1 Republicans, Michelle Garcia Holmes, Jared Vanderdusen, and Brett Kolkonitis. Michelle Garcia Holmes has been through a handful of races. Vanderdusen and Kolkonitis are relative newcomers. Again, all of them have run conservative campaigns. On the Republican side in CD2, this is the one that's gotten real nasty. Yvette Harrell narrowly lost last election. A lot of questions surrounding that. Claire Chase, Yvette Harrell, and Chris Mathis running. It's really between Chase and Harrell. Again, I don't see, it's one of those classic Republican things we see in this state where they're throwing food and battling it out, getting into the mud, and over relatively trivial policy differences. There's personality differences between Harrell and Chase, but it just, I would love to hear what you have to say, if anything, about that particular race, because I just, it's unfortunate to me as an observer. I'm not even going to vote in that race because I don't live in that district, to see two people tearing each other up for what I know both of them. I think they're fine individuals. It just baffles me.
Well, it does remind me of one of my favorite sayings is, what do you call two conservatives, or in this case, two Republicans that agree on 99.5% of the issues? In New Mexico, we call them sworn enemies. And you're right, there's a lot of personality in that congressional race that actually has gotten a lot of national attention. It's gotten so nasty and so ugly. And so we will have to see. And I tend to agree with you that the likely policy emphasis coming out of either one of those candidates would be pretty similar. But the other thing that's interesting is that if you are a Republican in New Mexico, there are many times when there's a primary election and you will have few and sometimes no choices, meaning there's just one candidate for each. And so, yeah, in both the congressional races and certainly in the statewide Senate race, there are choices to be had there. And like you said, are these candidates likely policy-wise much different? Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. I tend to think their policy-wise would be pretty similar. But also, winning a primary doesn't do anything. You don't get to be the candidate until you win the general election. So those things about electability and style and all those other things become pretty important. And so, yeah, I think this is more important than many primaries, particularly on the Republican side here in New Mexico.
Yeah, CD3 is another one. There's a lot of candidates on both sides. I think.
Yeah, on both sides, there's a lot on the D side in CD3.
There's something like 7 or 8 Democrats. I don't know a great deal about the Democrats in the primary. I know that this is a pretty safe Democratic seat. There's certainly a number of Republicans, and kudos to the Republicans for getting a good turnout in candidates to try to take that seat, which I believe hasn't been under Republican control since the mid-'90s. But boy, so many candidates to go through and look at. A little far afield for me running a state think tank. I just haven't had the ability to really look through all of those different folks. But a couple of races that I do find very intriguing, and incumbent Senator Jim White versus Greg Schmiedes. This is a clear ideological divide here with these two gentlemen. Schmiedes is an up-and-coming Republican who represents the East Mountains, a conservative, whereas Jim White has been very, very squishy. And Schmiedes has voted correctly in Rio Grande Foundation's index on a majority of issues. White voted for the Energy Transition Act. That's the shutdown of the San Juan generating station, 50% renewable mandate. He voted for a big tax increase in the form of HB6. He voted for the budget, HB2 in 2019, and HB6 was also 2019. White voted for the next budget, which was the 2020 budget, which was also a big increase. White's done some good things like opposing film subsidies, but if the Republicans don't vote like Republicans, how do we expect them to fight against the Democrats and their policy overreach? I mean, how do you vote for budgets that increase the size of government by 21% over a 2-year period and claim to be anything like a fiscal conservative or fiscally responsible?
Yeah, and so it does bring into question whether you really are or not. And then there are interesting things that happen on votes. And so it's one of those, believe me, right now in New Mexico, a unified Republican Party in either house, the House or the Senate, doesn't make much of a difference about anything. And so it just seems like you could say, what are you doing? Are you going to make the principal vote knowing that you're going to try to move to where that principle spreads throughout the body that you're in? Or are you just laying low and just going along with the flow and, doing whatever it is you're doing? But there are some interesting things that happen when power is so lopsidedly held as it is in New Mexico right now.
Yeah, and I could look back over my entire time period of being involved with the Rio Grande Foundation. Rarely are there ideologically, important primary battles on the Republican side, but there's two. The other one is Senator Greg Fulfer versus David Gallegos. Gallegos is an incumbent House member. Fulfer's the incumbent senator. It's not quite so clear as the White versus Schmiedes race, but definitely Gallegos is a principled conservative, and this is a district down in Hobbs. So that's a very interesting race in a Senate primary. There's a lot of them on the Democratic side, and I'll just run through a couple of them. Mary Kay Papin, who has a reputation somehow as being a conservative. Her votes don't reflect what I would call conservative, but I guess compared to the most progressive wing of the Democratic Party, she's more conservative.
Yeah, moderate or even a squishy moderate in New Mexico has become a target for the progressive wing of the Democratic Party in terms of primary opposition in many seats.
Milan Simonich, the political reporter from the Santa Fe New Mexican, alluded to the so-called fact that Mary Kay Papin's somehow conservative. But I could look through a lot of votes and not find a conservative strain within Papin's voting record. Carrie Ann Hamblin is the person challenging her. There's a number of primary challengers. Patricia Roybal Caballero versus Edwina Pina is another one. Roybal Caballero is just... there's rumors, very strong rumors, she doesn't live in her district, but she's just crazy, out of left field, progressive, not even someone that we're just calling progressive, but somebody who's out of touch, I think, with reality here. And anyway, we'll see if that...
So do you know, is her opponent more conservative than her, or just a different strain of progressive? Do you know? I do not know. But to see her draw a primary candidate, if anyone thinks that she's not progressive enough, that is striking.
Yeah,
if that's the case. I'm not saying it is.
It may be a case where even the progressives don't like the personality of one Roybal Caballero and find her to be ineffective. And the question is, do you want, as conservatives, libertarians, do we prefer sane, principled advocates for the other side's ideas, or do we want the crazier the better? And that is an open question. I don't know, but it is a reality. Well, there's a lot of races. If you have folks any questions, we're happy to do the best we can to shed any light on some of the votes and the races happening, especially in these primaries.
Yeah, and then, Paul, it doesn't really matter too much in the primary because on the Republican side, there's like on the state Senate, if my memory serves me correctly, and I was looking at this yesterday, there's one or two that are contested. Having said that, there's a Republican candidate in all but one or two of the spots, meaning there are going to be Republican candidates in the general election. And in the past, many seats, both in the House and the Senate in New Mexico, would just the game would be over at the end of the primary. There would be no general election because there's just one candidate. And one thing that, like I say, on my analysis, at least the New Mexico State Senate has done a fantastic job in terms of at least having candidates in all but one or two of the districts.
Yeah, the GOP did a much better job of fielding a lot of candidates this time around. And there's enthusiasm. I mean, you're seeing a handful of primaries. And like I said, that is a very rare occurrence on the Republican side of things. And again, 112, they're all up this session, and this redistricting, it's a very, very, very big election. Just a few minutes to go here. I was going to praise, to at least some regard, California Governor Gavin Newsom, who I believe it was over the weekend or maybe Friday, announced that he was planning 10% across the board salary cuts for all government workers in the state of California to address their $54 billion deficit. Now, California is
a big place,
exponentially bigger than New Mexico.
But at $54 billion, that's some serious money.
Yeah, but 10% across the board pay cuts, that's pretty impressive. And again, just contrasting with the crickets we're hearing out of Governor Lujan Grisham, at least California's progressive governor is recognizing Sacramento, we have a problem. Now, Newsom today, this being recorded on Monday, came out and said that, in a more of an interview kind of context, said, well, if we don't get another bailout from Washington, public servants like first responders are going to be the first employees on the chopping block. Now, that is classic Washington Monument Syndrome behavior, where politicians know that there is a relatively small number of absolutely essential people, and so who do they cut? Well, that absolutely important group, the 5% that are going to inflict maximum pain to get some kind of, he'll be saying, well, Donald Trump, Washington, D.C., Congress, they're evil. They haven't passed another big stimulus for us in here in California. So one wonders where Mr. Newsom will wind up, but I did wanted to highlight that 10% across the board salary cut, plan, because that's at least something tangible that a Democratic progressive governor is doing. Our governor has not done anything of that sort.
Although there are starting to be rumors, will there be a special session in June? And if so, how expansive will it be? Or is it going to be just the bare minimum that's necessary?
And last point we wanted to talk about here was the state of open government amidst the crisis. Rio Grande Foundation has been working diligently to try to hold government accountable, and it's been quite challenging to get information. Now, look, I understand that folks in the government are by and large working remotely and not necessarily going into the office and putting in the same hours they would normally be doing. But the Rio Grande Foundation, in a blog post on open government, the state of open government amidst the crisis, we detail, actually, Patrick Brenner, who handles a lot of our transparency initiatives at the foundation, details a number of requests that we've made and attempts to find basic information, including tax revenues, things like that, that we expect that policymakers will be using to make very important decisions about our economy. And the lack of responsiveness in a lot of these record request instances. So you can find out for yourself exactly what is happening in terms of open government. Of course, the whole pandemic kind of got off to a bad start for us with the city of Albuquerque when they went behind closed doors in what the ACLU and Pete Dinelli, prominent liberal political commentator type, said that they felt it was clearly illegal, a violation of the Open Meetings Act. Rio Grande Foundation sued, and the judge basically said, during a crisis like this, we're not going to hold them accountable for violating the Open Meetings Act. I felt that was a bad sign, and really, we are again left to the devices of the politicians who, we elect, and whether they decide that you've got to obey the law and the law is made for a time of crisis, or whether, during a time of crisis, you just let things slide and let the powers that be do whatever they need to do, quote unquote. And quite frankly, we're going to have this discussion next week on the podcast when we talk to Blair Dunn, who's an attorney who's going to walk us through some of the legal angles, because I think it's worth having a conversation, not just on open records, but, where does the governor derive her power from? How is she empowered to make all these decisions, including fining people for not wearing masks? So there's a lot to talk about on the open government and just the rule of law here.
Yeah, and the whole issues, transparency in a representative form of government, which we have. I'm really looking forward to that, Paul.
Awesome. Well, thank you for listening to this week's podcast. Make sure to get the latest edition of Tipping Point New Mexico by subscribing at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. You can post or comment on this and other episodes on Facebook and Twitter, and tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.